I think the fears were not justified. It's a very compelling situation. Hey, by the way, long-term private equity and venture capital, they're not going away. Being the banker to these immense pools of capital has always been a very good business.
What's up, folks? So Silicon Valley Bank has recently failed, stoking fears that other banks are going to fail, the federal government's going to try to do another bailout, and people are going to be screwed. Of course, psychopath and human pimple Jim Cramer just recently told people to buy that stock.
The ninth best performer year to date is SVB Financial, don't yawn. This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street had been mistakenly concerned about. SVB is the old Silicon Valley Bank.
The reason I call him a psychopath and yes, a human pimple, he looks like a pimple with a mouth and an opinion, is because I don't forget when Jim Cramer was trying to get the federal government to vaccinate everybody and use the military to do it.
We have immunocompromised people who are incubators for every variant to come, walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic. We have companies that have tried hard to get people vaccinated and now backing down. We have governors who want to be president by grandstanding on a foolish states' right issue, the right to get sick, get other people sick. So it's time to admit that we have to go to war against COVID. Require vaccination universally. Have the military run it.
Don't take your financial advice from a pimple with a mouth. Anyway, apparently Silicon Valley Bank had $209 billion in total assets at the end of last year, and this is a massive, massive move. We're gonna talk about it, why it happened, and I have a guest to do so. And second story is Saudi Arabia and Iran are striking a peace deal, and you can guarantee that America and Israel are not thrilled with this move. In fact, classic neocon Max Boot is even apologizing for being a neocon today. Weird. What's going on there? We'll talk about it. Welcome to the Dream Rare Podcast. It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is great and success in our control. The world is crazy, but we get better from obstacles. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of the Dream Rare Podcast. I brought on Clint from Liberty Lockdown for a few reasons, but one is I think he understands some of the financial ends of this banking stuff better than me, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. For those that don't know me, I'm host of Liberty Lockdown, and I was a entrepreneur, mortgage broker, private money for 15 years and retired in my late 30s, so I do know finance, and I got into it in the teeth of the 08-09 collapse, so like I can really talk about this stuff.
We appreciate it because I think it's a huge, huge story. There was hundreds of billions of dollars into this bank, and it failing is asking a lot of questions. Some people think that more banks are going to fail. They possibly might try to do another bailout, which will affect us. And, you know, I'm sure you have a lot to say, and I want to really just let you fly. I just want to play this Bloomberg clip real quick. It's like 40 seconds, and I think it did a pretty solid job. So let's watch.
SVB, like all other banks, are able to hold bonds on their balance sheet, and they can say on their balance sheet that they are worth at cost. They are worth what they had originally bought them at. Of course, that's no longer the case, especially for long duration bonds, which SVB had a lot of. So when you have a panic, when you have VC funds not doing well, they need to take money out, like we have been seeing recently. The issue becomes what happens when you need to liquidate those bonds. SVB at the end of last year said they were worth $91 billion. It's very highly likely they're not actually worth that because the Fed has been hiking rates. So you have this mismatch, and that's how you get this run on the bank potential and the wider fears of does it spill over into.
Yeah, so let it fly. Why do you think it failed? What was the mistake that they made?
Well, it's not really their fault in some ways, because what they did was they took their investor capital, which is the people that are just putting their deposits in the bank, and they put them in long dated treasuries. And they expecting that the Fed would never do what it has done over the past year, which is hike rates very aggressively, more rapidly and more consistently than I have ever seen in my lifetime, and maybe ever. Basically, what that means is that the actual price of those bonds, if you have to sell them before they actually expire, so like say you have a 10-year treasury, well, if the rate on what you bought them at was 1%, but they're now at 5%, you actually take a loss because the expected return is, you know, it's catastrophic. So if you have a run that comes because of, here's the more complicated picture. Because this is a bank in Silicon Valley, what that means is that they have a tremendous amount of their banking customers that are in the crypto space as well as the tech space. Because you have a hiking interest rate cycle, it means that capital is more hard to come by. So that means that these companies that had been keeping deposits with you are suddenly going, well, we need to use our capital because we can't go out and get loans right now. So they start to withdraw. That creates this vicious cycle. As their reserves drop, they start to try and seek liquidity, but the only thing they have left to sell are treasuries, which are way beneath what they should be, because the Fed has hiked rates really aggressively, and then ultimately you end up with a run on the bank as a result, and then it just becomes a catastrophe.
So I guess two questions I have is, one, was it a mistake for them to have so much of their capital in those treasury bonds?
Yeah, because they were longer duration. They were probably going after higher yield by putting them in longer duration, expecting that the Federal Reserve would never do what it did. But if you're a prudent, fiduciary for your investors' capital, they probably should have put them in, 1 or 2 year T-bills so that they wouldn't have gotten in this predicament.
Did they do? I don't know. I didn't see enough of it, but did they do it before 2020, or did they buy some of them after 2020?
That I don't know. I don't know like when they actually acquired them, but I would imagine that it was happening in 2019, 2021, and then the Fed just completely pivots and goes into this aggressive hiking cycle in I think it was February of 22, so just 13 months ago. But it has gone from basically zero Fed funds rate up to almost 5% Fed funds rate, and that is just a dramatic shift that I don't think very many people saw coming.
When 2020 happened, we could just replay it real quick. And a lot of people tell me, because of politics, obviously, Trump was in office. I think some people want to tell me let's not talk about the past, let's move on. And it's like, yeah, I'm not trying to. I'm not someone that's trying to talk about 1940s or something, but when we printed, I don't know if I've seen some reports that said it was 6 trillion, 9 trillion, 10 trillion. They printed so much money during COVID. Was it inevitable that the Fed was going to have to come to this fork in the road eventually, where either we raise interest rates or you get screwed another way?
Yeah, I mean, from the Austrian school perspective, yes, if they want to maintain the purchasing power of the dollar, they're going to have to hike interest rates to try and absorb some of the liquidity from the system. If they had maintained rates at the zero bound, essentially you'd just have people that are borrowing money because it's free and creating additional bubbles in the economy. So they start to hike rates because they want to bring down inflation. Well, then you have all these knock-on effects that start to emerge. And I actually said this a year ago. I said, if you see the Fed funds rate get around 5%, look out below. And I was just like, it was just a gut call. I didn't have any actual graphs or anything to say that, but I was like, I just know how this market works because I've been an investor and a player in it for so long. I was like, if the Fed funds rate gets to 5% and they hover around there or they go north of it, you're going to see insolvencies that strike in places you don't expect, and then you're going to see contagion events. And what a contagion means is that you have counterparty risk between banks. So you have Silicon Valley Bank. Well, some of their assets and some of their debt is held by other banks. And they have some of their deposits that are held by them as well. So if they're insolvent, that means that these other guys are trying to get their capital out. Now they can't get it out. Now their depositors start to sense that maybe there's problems at this bank. You start to get a run on that bank, and that's how you get this contagion effect where you start to see runs on a lot of banks. So I think that the FDIC or the Feds more broadly, or the Federal Reserve itself may intervene and try and stop this over the weekend. That'd be my expectation.
Right. I guess I want to say, when it came to the bailout of the banks in 2008, 2020 was different, but I did feel like there was a big corporate bailout because the government told everyone, you have to shut down. You have to shut down cruises, you have to shut down flights. And then there was essentially, I think, a massive corporate bailout where I think the cheese in the trap was we'll give the corporations trillions of dollars and then everybody will get $1,600. And essentially overnight, we had bipartisan universal basic income. We'll close all your stuff and here's the $1,600, and Boeing gets this money and Royal Caribbean gets this money. From that point on, wasn't it almost inevitable that they were going to have to hike the rates at some point, or am I missing something? Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, inflation is a product of money creation. That's really what it is. So it requires velocity or circulation of that capital to ultimately create consumer inflation, where the people start to feel it. So it had a lagging effect. So that's the main reason that politicians and central bankers can get away with this stuff, is because the average person goes, well, they printed all this money and we didn't have inflation, so I guess that wasn't it. Well, no, that's totally wrong. It's just because the money hasn't actually gotten into the system yet and created excess demand for goods that have too short of supply. Plus, you have the lockdowns, which break the supply chains, which reduces supply even further. So you have supply of capital that's up and supply of goods that's down. Ultimately, that means that you have an inflationary cycle. So this is all a product of 2020, man. It's all a product of it.
I want to ask some questions because I know a lot of people that are watching this are going to wonder, like, do you think more banks are going to fail? Like, is my money safe? How bad is this going to be? But first, on that note, real quick, I just have to bring it up because it's actually strategic. And I know this, unfortunately, this is going to bother a lot of people. This isn't like a Democrat excuse because they were in on it in 2020 and 2021 also. And Biden's obviously not helping any.
No.
But in general, the funny thing is that strategically, it was actually really good for Republicans to not win presidency in 2020, in my opinion, because now everybody, even a lot of Democrats think, and I would say almost all Republicans are calling it Bidenflation, Bidenflation. But the truth is really the Fed and both parties printed all this money in 2020. In my view, if Republicans took every seat in the world, I mean, her pain was still coming, maybe to a slightly less extent, but the real damage was done in 2020 by McConnell, Pelosi, Trump, Jerome Powell, all of them. And now Republicans kind of get to sit back and point to Biden, and everybody actually believes it. I'm not saying he's like a great person. I'm just saying like the damage was done, and there was nothing to change it after that point.
Well, and Fauci has to take some of the blame here too. I mean, all these people lied through their teeth saying that we can do this and we will not have catastrophic economic consequences, which is just patently false. This is part of the reason I started my show is because I was so furious that they were just lying through their teeth. I'm like, I'm a finance guy. I know for a fact we are going to pay a huge economic price for this, and they just completely discounted it.
Let's talk about like I should have uploaded the clip of all of them saying like it wasn't coming and don't worry. Let's talk about Janet Yellen, right? She's a financial expert. I think she was in during the Obama administration too. I think Biden put her at, what is she, the treasurer? Is that her role?
Yeah, Secretary of the Treasury, I think.
Secretary of the Treasury. I mean, her saying in 2021 that the experts are saying that inflation's not coming and recession's not coming. Like, obviously, with your financial expertise, she has to know she's lying, right?
Here's the weird thing about this. I would assume so. However, these people go to, Keynesian colleges. So like they honestly believe that Keynesian economics is legitimate, and they also believe in modern monetary theory to a large extent. So like I think some of them are drinking their own Kool-Aid, but I can't tell you for sure who is doing that and who's actually just a scumbag or who's an idiot. I don't know which.
Me with I'm not going to say, I mean, I have real life experiences. I got a PhD at the School of Hard Knocks. No, but, on the streets. But, as somebody with basic common sense and semi-understanding, I thought to myself in 2020, just as they were printing all the money and the lockdowns were happening, I was like, I would be happily surprised if the whole, like anything short of our whole thing collapsing is a win to me. And anything short of like full-blown recession would be a win. When they're like, is recession coming? I would have been blown away if there was no sort of recession, because I just have basic understanding of like, well, you printed what? $6-10 trillion and gave everybody money and then shut down the supply chain as you were doing it, as if money printing's not bad enough. You're also shutting down entire supply chains, and you're mandating that entire companies shut down and stay home. I'm thinking to myself, I would love if this didn't collapse our system. And now you're starting to see some of the things. So obviously things have gotten bad. Everyone sees the prices, How bad do you think it's going to get without like overly fear mongering? And is this like a lone bank, or is this bank connected to other banks, or this is going to have a domino effect?
Yeah, that's the hard thing to say. Like, clearly, if there is no FDIC or Federal Reserve intervention, there will be contagion. It doesn't mean that we'll have a full-on banking collapse if they don't intervene. However, I think they will intervene. So I'm not going to try and panic people, because I don't think you should panic necessarily. Unless the Fed has decided that they are willing to let all of the consequences play out of not intervening because they're so concerned about a hyperinflationary period, I think that they will intervene. But I don't know for sure, because they could be looking at the inflation and saying, look, we've been hiking very aggressively. Prices are still increasing, and maybe we have to do this potentially just to defend the dollar. There's another dynamic that needs to be discussed. And I don't know if you intended to, so maybe I should hold off. But the Saudi Arabia, Iranian, and Chinese.
No, let it fly. When it comes, it comes. Yeah.
Okay. So Saudi Arabia and Iran have been essentially like arch nemesis for quite some time, and primarily because Saudi Arabia agreed to Nixon's deal. I think it was Nixon. When it came to the petrodollar system, where they would only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. And what that did was, as we came off the gold standard in the 1970s, because the U.S. dollar was still basically assured to be used in a huge percentage of global transactions when it came to oil sales, what that did was it created an underpinning, basically like a hard asset that supported the value of the dollar. Well, now, because of the Jamal Khashoggi murder by the Saudis and some other things that have been happening with Russia, Ukraine, a whole bunch of geopolitical stuff, I won't get into all of it, but it seems as if the Saudis are kind of realigning their allegiances when it comes to who they're going to be doing business with moving forward. And I think that what they're doing is shifting to an Iranian, Chinese, Russian alliance with Saudi Arabia. And if that comes to pass, and it looks like it is, that means that the underpinning to the US dollar is now basically broken. And that is big news. And no one is talking about that yet. So that's what people really ought to be paying attention to. And it's so complicated, I don't think most people will even understand what I'm saying right now.
Right. No, I think we should weave back and forth between the two stories. So the second story was, I'm just going to read the headline, but everybody's reporting on it. Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to reestablish diplomatic relations and reopen embassies after years of tensions. The two countries released a joint communique with China on the deal, which apparently brokered the agreement. And that's exactly what's happening. And I know, me and Clint are, I'm pretty sure, on the exact same page about the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And people say, oh, what do you like, Russia? Oh, what do you hate, Ukraine, or whatever it is? And it's like, you got to understand that we pissed a lot of people off. We pissed off a lot of the world. We pissed off China. We pissed off Russia. Saudi Arabia is now starting to do deals with Iran, which is part of that whole system. And like Clint perfectly illustrated, perhaps besides all of the bloodshed, which is important, and the murders, which we don't agree with, the petrodollar is really our entire economy. The whole reason America has, is a prosperous place to live. And even if you're lower to middle class, you can still live a great life compared to most of the world. It's all reliant on the strength of the US dollar and the petrodollar. And with this sort of move, I don't think this is a random move either. I think a lot of countries are not respecting us. I don't, even Biden is a joke. Trump is basically telling Mexico that he's going to wage war on the cartels. I saw someone write in the comments, I'm not sure, that Mexico's starting to align with this new order, that's going on in the world. I don't know for sure, but when you have one of the presidents who's likely to win next election saying that he's going to wage war in your country, why wouldn't you side with China and Saudi Arabia and Iran? Right. So we've made a lot of enemies. We've made a lot of foolish moves. And, do you think that this is connected to the Saudi-Iran thing? I mean, obviously it has consequences, but the timing of it, like bank collapses, our greatest ally who holds up our petrodollar basically gets along with our quote-unquote enemy.
Dude, I'll go even more tinfoil hatty. I think that the Russia-Ukraine war is also partially about the petrodollar system. The first thing we did when Russia invaded was we kicked them off of SWIFT and we drove Russia directly into the arms of the CCP. So that was already a financial war. And then we put on sanctions and we went after the billionaires of Russia. In fact, we confiscated hundreds of billions of their cash, and now they're talking about just seizing it and giving it to the Ukrainians for rebuilding. So basically stealing hundreds of billions of dollars from the Russians. Now, right. you can feel like that's just because like they destroyed their nation, and maybe it is moral. I don't know. But regardless, once you start to play at this high level financial warfare, which is what this is, well, then all of the players that are in the periphery that you don't really think about very often, like Mexico or Canada or Saudi Arabia or Iran, well, right. They all have to start to choose a side. And what happens is when other players start to choose the other side, well, then other players start to go, maybe that side's going to win. Maybe I want to be a player on that side. It's everyone. All they're doing is they're trying to pick the next big dog on the block. And everyone is looking at America going, you guys are out of your minds. You're trying to pick wars with both Russia and China right now. Maybe we should be aligning with these people. Maybe these are the new power brokers of the next century. And they may be right. And that's what concerns the hell out of me.
Right. And on that note, we might as well just weave through all three stories. Max Boot, I would say it's hard to pick like a neocon because some neoconservative became this term that was used for people like Lindsey Graham and Max Boot, who basically wanted America to run all over the world and fight whoever they wanted and whatever. Yep. It was a very warmonger agenda. Max Boot, if I could pick one in my head, like he might be the top neoconservative. He basically apologized on Twitter today and said, maybe I was wrong after 9/11. Maybe I went too hard with neoconservatism. Is this another coincidence that the day that a bank collapses and the day that Saudi Arabia agrees with Iran, that the biggest neocon in the world who would be opposed to that agenda is apologizing and basically almost forfeiting, waving like a white flag?
Well, it is interesting timing. I'll give you that. But I think that it's also something to be said for like the neoconservative brand has been tarnished so badly that I think this guy may just be kind of repackaging himself to try and stay relevant, because he is universally reviled online. Every single thing he puts out, he is just nuked by our people, like the anti-war America First type of people. So I think he may have just kind of broken down and decided to change his opinion. But let me also add, I read that whole meandering piece by him, and while he's backing off of this like invasion to spread democracy theology, because he's really a religious zealot, in my opinion. What he's not backing off of is we should still be defending Ukraine to the end of the earth. We should still be defending any democracies across the globe that have any sort of conflict. So this guy's still not really a peacenik by any stretch of the imagination. He's just come off of it a little bit. And let me add one other note, which makes me so sick to my stomach. Never once does he talk about the death and destruction of innocents that his propaganda drove our nation to commit in his name and in your and I's name, even though we opposed it. I despise people like this. If you're going to come off this, you have to acknowledge the pain and suffering that you participated in largely as a propagandist for the military-industrial complex. So you're not forgiven, Max Boot. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, so it's a fake apology is what you're saying. I believe you. It reminds me of Ben Shapiro. I don't remember where he was on, but he basically had said, he was like, I think differently than I was. He basically was like, now I'm a Henry Kissinger conservative. Like that was the win for him. He was like, I used to be really bad and now I'm like Henry Kissinger. It's like, bro, Henry Kissinger is like King Warmonger. So that's the more improved version of your foreign policy. That's frightening. It's like, okay.
He's like, now I only want to mandate 2 doses. No longer the boosters. It's like, oh, great job.
Yeah, no, it was not a good apology, but that's I guess with the bank thing too. Some people are saying don't have the feds intervene, like just let them fail because there's consequences on both sides. So I guess what would you say to that? Because you said I think they are going to intervene. What's the downside to them not intervening, and what's the downside to them intervening? Because there's got to be a playoff. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's a trade-off always, and what the trade-off always is pain now or pain later. That's really what it is. So if they don't intervene, the pain's now. Because that means that you'll have cascading defaults that start and contagion effects that start to strike other banks, and not just banks, but you got to keep in mind too. Roku, for instance, had some crazy amount of money, like $40 million cash that was sitting in this bank. If they don't get that money, well, then they're probably insolvent themselves because that cash sits there, but it's also needs to pay for marketing budgets and all sorts of other things. So you have one major bank, and it was a major bank that cannot deliver its funds to its clients. Well, then they can't perform on a whole bunch of contracts. So you could have industry-wide, and particularly in the tech industry, because so many of the depositors there were tech giants and VCs and tech tycoons. Well, you'll see major problems across a broader market than just the banking.
Right.
Now here's the inverse of it. If you do bail them out, well, then that means that risk is back on because the Fed has signaled once again, or the FDIC is signaling along with the Fed once again, that we are the backstop. We're not going to allow this house of cards to fall. Everybody says the game's still running. Then you start to see inflation really pick up again. So it can go either direction, deflationary bust or hyperinflation.
Yeah, I know CNN is not everybody's favorite source, but last year with the financial stuff, I think a lot of their reporting on this is like based off of the books. That's why I'm reading it. But it says, while they're relatively unknown outside Silicon Valley, SBV was among the top 20 American commercial banks with $209 billion in total assets at the end of last year. Like Clint's talking about, how many Silicon Valley companies are invested, how much money did they have in that? If they never get their money, that could cause a huge splash, across the whole
problem.
I wanted to say this too, because I'm hoping that things get better. I don't want to see our currency collapse, but I have to say with 2020, it was almost like a test run. And this is why I was so against all the tyranny, besides the fact that I think it's just in my blood. I have no quit. It was really a test run. And you have to understand, when it comes to not just the federal government, but these tech companies, they have all our data. And the more, it's like an experiment. So it's like, okay, what would happen if we lock people in their houses for a month? What would happen if we make people wear masks and make them do a task? What would happen if we make people wear a mask on an airplane, but take their mask off when they eat and wear a mask when they sit down and take it off when they start eating, which makes no scientific sense. Will they listen? What if we force test everybody? What if we do mandates? And they have all this data, and not to be pessimistic, but I think we failed. And I really think that way too many people complied. So now, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a collapse or, something catastrophic happens with our currency and hyperinflation. Well, the government already knows how to lock people down. They know how to keep people it was way too easy. And so many people that I consider strongmen and patriots and conservatives, and obviously the left is of no use during these times, but it wasn't like a 50-50. It was more like 90% of people were like, well, I'll just fake the card, or I gotta just do what I gotta do. And it's like, to me, they have all the data of what they would have to do if there was another huge collapse of some sort in a crisis, and how to basically, treat people like animals and slaves.
Well, and on top of that, they also got a test run on UBI, as you already mentioned. So I think that that's probably the play. Like, if the Fed intends to allow the deflationary bust to come, I would read that as they are prepared to roll out the central bank digital currencies along with UBI to bail out the American people, but in fact enslave us. Because that's really what it would mean. If you have a central bank digital currency, we will never be free again. So I think that that's a possibility, but then you get into the real Alex Jones territory where this is all the great reset and this is part of the Davos agenda. And I don't know if that's true. So I don't want to say that with any sort of certitude, but it's possible.
What did you think when Trump did his speech and he said, listen, we're going to do freedom cities. The federal government's going to build 15 cities, and it's going to be a federal government freedom city, on federal land. What was your first thought when you heard that clip?
My first thought was, you don't beat the CCP by becoming the CCP. I mean, this is exactly what China did. They built up these cities that people didn't need because they expected the farmers to, or the agrarian society to become these city dwellers. And the people didn't have the money. They weren't ready for it. So they just create this big bubble in their real estate market, which is still, kind of in disarray in China right now. So, I just can't disagree more, man. If this is the great hope of conservatism, small government conservatism, is that you're going to sell off federal lands to your crony, business partners to go build these cities. That if there's a demand for a city, you don't need President Trump to actually be funding and creating it. Cities are a naturally arising phenomenon. They happen because there's industry in an area and a lot of people want to live there. It's just disappointing, man, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, people get mad, but you go through, I like to walk people through slowly, or else if it just seems too much. But it's like George Bush was the Republican who told everybody that we needed to fight the Muslims, the Patriot Act, and, the Iraq war, and that backfired. And then there was a need for a liberal who wouldn't drive us to war, and that was Obama. And he was an outsider because he was young and he was cool, and he played basketball, and he liked rap music. And I was like, oh, this seems cool. I thought he'd be a puppet, but I'm like, Mitt Romney, John McCain, maybe he'll be better than them because they're not the real deal. And then 8 years of Obama, people are fed up. He was the same. He sold out to the banks. He did everything they wanted to do. And then people needed someone else. And they gave people Donald Trump, the outsider who doesn't need their money. And then Donald Trump took their money, and now when I report on it, people get mad because they like him a lot. He printed more money than Obama printed during the lockdowns. He branded the vaccine thing Operation Warp Speed as if it's some sort of Space Force thing. And now he's talking about freedom cities. And I'm not telling people to hate him or to vote for Joe Biden, but it's like this game of just putting characters in front of people that they like is so obvious. And it's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. They already rolled out this, global mRNA vaccine agenda, and Trump calls it one of his greatest accomplishments. And I think it's the worst thing he ever did, but he thinks it's the best thing he ever did. So when he rolls out freedom cities, and you have these World Economic Forum types, talking about similar stuff, I'm not saying it's that, but even outside of whatever they're saying, it's like, what happens if Donald Trump wins for 4 years, builds freedom cities, and then, Gavin Newsom wins in 8 years and it goes back to the Democrats, like sadly it always does. Who controls, who controls Space Force right now? Apparently Kamala Harris. Who's going to control these freedom cities? The federal government under a Democrat? Like, come on, bro. And everybody's falling for it.
And what will those cities be filled with? They'll be filled with tech companies that are, ESG practitioners, just woke garbage. Like if the Democrats are in charge of it. So look, if you don't trust the government, which after the COVID hysteria, you should not trust the government at this point. Well, then you have to shrink the size of government. You don't shrink the size of government by having the president of the United States commit to building enormous cities in the middle of nowhere, thinking that you're going to bring back industry by top-down creation of demand. It's just not how the economy works, man. This is what, like, old school conservatives got this. Like, you let the market do its damn thing. You don't make the market do its thing. And basically he's taking on basically a liberal perspective when it comes to, or not a liberal, but a Democrat perspective when it comes to economics. And I can't disagree with it more. And, I like the guy. He's hilarious. He's a sledgehammer, and he was a wrecking ball. He drove it right through the heart of the mainstream media. And I love him for all that. But he didn't fire Fauci. He should have got him charged with treason as far as I'm concerned. He did Operation Warp Speed. He still doesn't regret it. And now his big genius idea is centralized planned economy. Like, no thanks, man. Just being straight.
Yeah, and we turned into China in 2020. It's like we always looked at China like, okay, we're not perfect, and China does some things better than us, but for the most part, we have freedom. We don't lock our citizens down. We don't do all this crazy stuff. And then we just somehow turned into China, and both parties were cool with it for 3 months. And I'm like, damn, that sucked. We'll get back to the banking stuff. So Silicon Valley Bank pretty much failed today. That was a Friday surprise that I wasn't really expecting. Do you think there's more banks that did that? Because obviously SBV or whatever, you notice how they both kind of sound the same. Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, and then Silicon Valley Bank. It's like these 3-letter things that start with S just destroying our economy. He was basically, it seemed like, using the funds, this Bankman-Fried guy, and just kind of splurging. These people bought too many treasury bonds when the interest rates are hiked, and then when they needed to liquidate the money, they didn't have it, so they were basically overstepping. Do you think there's a lot of companies or banks that are kind of doing the same, where they have fake value, or they have too much invested in things that are down now?
Yeah, I mean, the way it works is that a bank has to prove not just its assets, but also its liquidity. I mean, this is the whole argument that people like Elizabeth Warren, the scumbag that she is, trying to put these oversight organizations when it comes to banking after the 08-09 collapse, saying, oh, these banks can't regulate themselves. Let's have the government do it. So the government comes in there and they create these new regulatory bodies, and they're allegedly there to protect the consumer. Do they protect the consumer ultimately? No. They'll turn around, they'll bail out the banks to stop a contagion effect, because ultimately that might create riots, which the government doesn't want. But it's just heartbreaking that people continue to think that having the government intervene actually keeps us safe. What really keeps us safe is allowing bad business practices to pay a price. The bad banks that do stupid stuff ought to pay a price, but because none of them have in basically my lifetime, other than Washington Mutual in 2008, all the other banks get bailed out, and Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers. But all the other banks get bailed out, and they're allowed to acquire these broken banks. Well, all the guys that are left now think that they're invincible. They are definitionally too big to fail. So they think that they're above the law, and they think that they'll be bailed out no matter what. But to answer your question, Yeah, I think that there are probably other banks that are in a similar circumstance, maybe not as bad, probably not as bad. But what's interesting about this too is that normally when you have a bank insolvency, it's usually dealt with over a weekend. The fact that they announced it on a Friday before close of business is fascinating. And this is actually Tom Luongo's thesis, but I was reading about it, and he's thinking that what this is they wanted to signal that there is trouble in the banking sector because Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve has been so steadfast in his hiking process for interest rates, and the banks are suffering terribly because of it. So he wants Jerome Powell to feel the heat, or like Biden or whoever made this call. And the thesis is that Jerome Powell will now reverse course and say, okay, we'll chill off on the hiking of the interest rates. We'll kind of go back.
I have a question, because I obviously, when a bank fails and when they scam people, I don't feel bad for them. But say I have my money in JP Morgan. I mean, they're probably not going to fail. But say they do, like should I lose my money for trusting them? I guess that's the argument of, like, if the government doesn't intervene, thousands of companies that went with Silicon Valley Bank are going to suffer. So,
right.
I understand why they try to help, because everybody shouldn't suffer, or should they, because they trusted a bad bank, because I don't know how that works.
Yeah, you can still have private insurance for bank funds. So like the fact that we have FDIC, which is a federal deposit insurance company, all that means is that they've basically nationalized the banking insurance practices. So if you disagree with nationalizing industries, you should probably disagree with that too. Like, it should be a private insurance that's set up to guarantee solvency to the depositors, because that's really all you and I care about, is that the little guy who puts his deposits in the bank, he ought to be able to get them back when he needs them. So I think that really it's a misplaced trust in the system. It's saying, well, the federal government has the ability to print money, so I'll never lose this money. I'm guaranteed my $250,000 FDIC insurance. Like, of course I'm going to get my money back. Well, the truth is that the feds don't have to do it if they don't want to. So you're not really secured. You're just secured based off of this thesis that the government will always be solvent, and it won't be always. So
I saw that some of the people involved in Silicon Valley Bank, I didn't research it enough to really state it as a fact, but I saw a bunch of people that I semi-trust post it, that some of the founders or some of the people in Silicon Valley Bank, they sold their stocks like days ago or weeks ago for millions of dollars, like 4 million. I think I saw that number.
Yeah. CFO, CTO, CEO. The three top guys at that bank sold out. I think it was 3 million, but whatever. It's a decent chunk of stock. And then 3 days ago, or maybe it was 4 now, the CEO comes out and says, we're fine. Don't even sweat it. So this dude knew. He clearly knew.
See, now that's bad, where it's like you're selling your stock, but then you're counter signaling that it's fine when it's about to
I think you should go to jail. I agree. I think that he broke his fiduciary duty to his depositors. Like, he should go to prison for that. And I was a banker, and I had, tens of millions of dollars at my disposal that was my client's capital. Had I done what he did, I should go to prison. That's fraud. That's deep corruption. So I have no mercy for that guy.
Right. It's one thing to mess up. It's another thing to mess up and lie about it. It's another thing to mess up, lie about it, sell your own money, get out of it, and then tell everybody else that it's fine. I agree. That's criminal. That's
evil, dude. Just straight up evil. So, and the crazy thing is, oftentimes guys like that don't pay the price. And that's what's most infuriating, is like the CEOs of Washington Mutual and Lehman and Bear Stearns, like, those guys should have gone to prison for that. Like, if you're going to run your company so poorly that you lose billions of dollars of investors' capital, like, why? Like, but you can steal $10,000 from a store. You can go to prison for like 5 years, but you can steal billions and you don't see the inside of a jail cell. Like, it just makes me furious.
Right. And that's, if I could pick two industries that really control politics, like, I'm not talking like groups of people or foreign countries. Thank you for the super chats, guys. I missed a few, but I just saw that one. Thank you. The two, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I would say big pharma and the banks. Would you agree that those are like two of the biggest industries in America that kind of run things?
I think those two in the military industrial complex, like,
right.
That's it. That's what runs us.
And then that's another thing. I mean, let's talk about liability, or I guess accountability for all three. Banks, they could fail, nobody goes to jail. They could scam, nobody goes to jail. They could open up accounts, like I think it was Wells Fargo, they got in trouble doing certain stuff, no one goes to jail. Big Pharma, they could lie, Bextra, they can, like millions of people could die from certain products. Oh my God, we made a mistake. Purdue Pharmaceuticals, nobody goes to jail. A military industrial complex, they could kill thousands of people, spend trillions of dollars, basically put your entire country at risk geopolitically, and nobody goes to jail. And here's what I've started to notice, and it's really starting to bother people, and I really don't care. Like, part of me does care because I'm low-key a little bit sensitive. I do have a soul and a heart, and I do care, but I'm not going to stop because people don't get the game. The banks swarm Trump and Biden. The pharmaceutical, they swarm Trump and Biden. I do think Trump did a pretty good job with the military industrial complex, but there's things that he didn't do. But I do give him credit there. But the point that I'm trying to get to is not that I hate him or that. It's just people fall in love with the car salesman, or people fall in love with the politician, where I'm trying to show people $100 million of corporations swarm Trump, and then he turned into a different person and hired them, and it's part of the system. You think he's selling the COVID vaccine? You think Donald Trump really thinks it's the greatest human achievement? He knows he's lying. I know he's lying. Everyone knows he's lying. You think he thinks that the COVID vaccine saved 100 million lives? He knows he's lying. I know he's lying. Everyone else knows he's lying. He worked with Pharma. He hired pharmacy lobbyists. He took Pharma money, and he turned out like just another politician. And it bothers people because instead of in God or in themselves or whatever it is, they put their all-seeing godlike faith into a politician to think that he's going to solve them. But if the banks and big pharma, et cetera, are swarming all these people, and you sit and play the little circus game that they always want, oh, we're fighting the other side, it's never going to end. So I know it's a hard task, but, let me know what you think. I think the solution is when enough people realize the game that's being played, that's when they have to play a different game. But as long as everybody keeps playing this red versus blue game, I'm not saying to vote blue, and I'm not saying to not vote, but show them that you notice what's going on. If you just play these false paradigm, like little fights, like Trump versus DeSantis, it doesn't matter. They're controlled by the same people. It's 2 years of Trump being like, well, DeSantis is sold out. Well, so are you. I'm fine with saying DeSantis is sold out, but you are too. But now he's going to brainwash the followers into saying, well, DeSantis is sold out and Trump's the outsider. Trump took the bank money. He took the money from Pharma. He hired all the swampers. He hired Goldman Sachs people. He hired Pfizer people. He hired Eli Lilly people. He's the same as DeSantis. Oh, but what do you think about all that? I kind of just said a lot.
No, I mean, it's just facts. Like this is what drives me crazy is, people will think that it's coming from a hateful place. It's like, this is just the truth. That's the truth of what Trump did in his presidency. Okay. So like, you can still love the guy as a human being. I don't care. But as a president, he led us astray. He just flatly did. And I'm just not going to make excuses for it. Like, I can still appreciate him for what he was. He's probably the best president of my life, especially if it weren't for 2020. He'd definitely be the best president of my life. But reality is 2020 was one of the worst years of my life. And he allowed that to happen under his watch as the top executive of the land. And he doesn't fire Fauci. And he takes all this money from Pharma. And look, Pharma basically just ran the country for over a year because of his presidency. And he could have intervened. He could have fired all of the top heads of NIH and NIAID. I mean, it would have been Fauci in both regards, but he could have fired a lot of people, and he didn't. And he didn't. And he sailed off into the sunset, just more concerned about looking after his own ass. And he also didn't pardon the J6ers, which we now know what a catastrophe and injustice that was. So, like, I don't know, man. I don't know how people still look at him in hindsight even and still go like, this was my guy. Like, maybe he got ran. Maybe he got ran by the deep state. Maybe he got threatened. I don't know. But like in reality, in action, what he did is that he did not deliver on his promises. And that's just the truth.
Well, I think banking's a little more difficult because it's so complex. But when it comes to pharma, it's like, I get the game. I mean, I just saw another stat that showed that America has the most adolescents on like depression pills. Yeah. I despise big pharma. I think they're evil. I think if we're going to talk about the Mexican cartel, we have to handle the big pharma cartel. I mean, the type of stuff that they're doing with opioids, this type of stuff that they're doing, putting all the kids on all this stuff, it's beyond evil. It's screwing up the mentality of our country. It's screwing up the physical of our country. They won't even let us reject their products when they roll out synthetic mRNA. Like, big pharma is psychotic. I just can't. can't throw all my weight. I'm not fake or stupid or weak enough to say my leader's the guy who says that the mRNA product's the greatest human achievement. My guy's the guy who took $1 million from Pfizer. My guy's the guy who filled his cabinet with pharmacy lobbyists. That's what Trump did. I don't like him. I don't like him anymore at all. I don't trust him, and I think he's a false paradigm. Now he's going to brainwash people into saying DeSantis is sold out when he's also sold out. But the point that I'm getting to is I don't say this to be a doomer and a gloomer. To me, the solution is if you stand up to these politicians and say, I know what you're doing. I know you're also taking money from Sheldon Adelson or when he was alive. I know you took money from Big Pharma. I know you didn't finish half the stuff that you did for this reason. And I know you're sold out too. That's when people are like, oh, well, I guess I'm not popular anymore. I got to kind of switch what I'm doing. But no, there's no need to switch what's going on because the false paradigms are all over. It's like Biden versus Trump. DeSantis versus Trump. That's the new one where Trump says you closed down beaches, you sold the vaccine, you're corrupt, you're a pedophile, and then people are like, oh yeah, I mean, Trump's the outsider. He's creating this whole brand of outsider versus guy who sold out, but he's also sold out. He's just as sold out, if not more sold out than DeSantis. And DeSantis is taking the money and he'll sell out too. DeSantis isn't your hero either. But if people just keep playing these games, it's never going to end. And I don't say this to be for any other reason besides like, if people want to act stupid, you get stupid prizes. You act like sheep, you get treated like sheep. Our country is way too obese, on pharmacy pills, and both sides are working for Big Pharma, and neither side is going to fix the food industry. What are you going to do about it? You going to wave a flag that says MAGA on it? You going to wear a mask and call yourself a Biden supporter? Well, like, it's the same game. You're the right-wing useless idiot, and they're the left-wing useless idiot, and they're going to bash your heads against each other, and one of you is going to have a DeSantis hat, one of you is going to have a Trump hat, but we need to get to the core of it. DeSantis will probably sell out because he's taking hundreds of millions of dollars of donor money. Trump did sell out, and he took hundreds of millions of dollars of donor money, but it's never going to end. It's like this big, I'm starting to see it, and I'm like, damn, they really got not just the left-wing brainwash, but they have the right, I call it, it's a circus going nowhere. There's a big Trump circus. He's the king, ringleader, clown, and they're going in circles, and they're making all these things. I want to say this real quick. I know I'm grandstanding, but, everybody wants to talk about elections. I'm going to say every election was stolen in the last 60 years because both parties are taking the lobbying money, and both parties are taking billionaire and donor money, and both people are selling out to Big Pharma. So you want to talk about elections being stolen? Your 2016 election was stolen because Trump took all the money and sold the country out to Big Pharma. And when you sell out to Big Pharma, you get things like 2020 lockdowns. So you guys want to live in this fake little circus Donald Trump's creating? Oh, 2020. But you don't even talk about March 2020 to November 2020. You got brainwashed into forgetting the worst crime in modern history that was done by both politicians. It's a circus going nowhere. And just like people didn't want to hear it in 2020, people don't want to hear it now, but it's like I could see 20 years of nothing at this point.
Bro, I beautifully said, and let me just add too. Now the two circuses going nowhere. One has Russia and World War III stamped on it, and the other one has China and Mexico World War III stamped on it. And I'm just like, what are we even talking about here? Like, first off, the war on drugs is a failure. I'm sorry. Like I don't do any drugs. I don't want to see anybody on drugs. I think that it's tragic, all of the fentanyl overdoses and the heroin overdoses. But let's just be honest. The CIA has been involved in the drug trade my entire life. They have been. And if they want to go to war with the cartels, it's because they probably got cut out. That's the truth. I think that China took over their cartel deals, and the CIA is like, yo, this is a problem. This is how we fund our black ops. If you don't believe me, look up Iran-Contra, look up the Sandinistas, look up Iran. This is real shit. Sorry, didn't mean to cuss, but it's just a fact. So, like, I just don't buy any of it. I think it's all a show. I think that they don't care about the fact that your cousin died of an overdose in Alabama or whatever. They don't care. They don't care about you. And they don't care about risking World War III or nuclear war. It's just about, can we keep the power? That's what they're there for. And this is why I'm a libertarian. People go, oh, you're throwing away your vote. Look, you vote for either of the options that you're presented. You're throwing away your vote. So I'm just done playing the game, and I've been done for a while, but I'm glad to see people like you that are just like, look, I went back and forth. I saw both sides of this. They're both lying to me. They're both taking me into a direction that I don't want to go. And it's heartbreaking. I feel for people. Like I've been seeing it for a long time. So it makes me feel better to see more people seeing it,
Yes, sir. I want to wrap this up because we're at 48 minutes. I want to keep it under an hour. So we got like 10 minutes. Here's what I'll say. And this is the sad part about not being moral. At the end of the day, I understand nobody's perfect. No country is perfect. I'm not a self-hating American where I'm like, America's so bad. Like, we shouldn't even exist. Like, I'm liberal, dirt. I'm not that person. But I don't believe America's been moral for a long time. It's been way too long. So we're going around the world doing all this messed up stuff in we've lost, in my opinion, and I know some people won't believe in this, but I think if you stand in the truth, I believe you have some sort of favor. I'll say with God because I'm a religious person, but in general, it's like, it's like the golden rule. If you're always treating everybody terribly, it really weighs on you. You can't just be a horrible person. You're going to get got. So America's doing all this stuff. And now really all we do have is our military force. It's really sad because, does Saudi Arabia look at America and say, oh, we want to be just like America? They're disgusted by all the liberal stuff they're doing. And honestly, they're right to be disgusted by it because it is absolutely disgusting. Iran, I'm not saying they're perfect, but it's like debatable now. Like, we're disgusting. They're doing messed up stuff. They're not envious of what we're doing. Does China care about us? No. We've lost the moral high ground. I'm not saying they're great, perfect countries, but nobody really looks at America like, oh, we really respect their culture. Like, no one does that. So nobody really cares about us anymore. Saudi Arabia doesn't care about us. India probably doesn't care about us. All our allies don't care about us. And we're losing that. So I wanted to really bring this up. All we have keeping our petrodollar up, sadly, is the military. It's been that way, but I feel like at a certain point, people did respect America. That's the free country. That's the country with the Constitution. And now all we have is our military. So is that maybe the play, whether it's Mexico or Russia? Is it like all we have is war? So we're just going to wage war on everybody and just like cling on to war and hope that our currency doesn't implode?
This is the historical pattern that is almost unavoidable, is that when an empire is in decline, it usually lashes out in war or civil war. And we are potentially on the cusp of either, like it could go either direction. And I don't want to see either. I'm a peaceful person. I'm a libertarian. I don't want to see war. And I certainly don't want to see a civil war. It'd be horrific. So, but to your point and to your question, yeah, I mean, that's how they keep the game going a little bit longer, because when you start to blow up other people and you start to turn up the printing presses, but it's not actually being deployed domestically, it's just being, incinerated on innocent people overseas. Well, you don't have the inflation right away, but what it does do is it creates an economic churn that allows for the economy to stay afloat a little bit longer. And if you prevail in the war, well, then you can still assert your dominance over the globe and force the Saudis or whoever else to start to trade in the US dollars again. So like they could do that. They could try and go all in on a war and say, we're going to win this thing and we're going to reassert the petrodollar stranglehold on the globe. I think that they're playing with terrible fire, because what we're talking about is not Iraq. It is not Afghanistan. This is China with 300 advanced nuclear warheads. This is Russia with 5,000 plus advanced nuclear warheads. You can't have a war with these people. You can't do it. So I'm just imploring people to wake up to like how dangerous this is and how it's all unnecessary, how it all could have been avoided. From 1991 in the fall of the USSR, you didn't have to expand NATO up to Russia's doorstep. None of this had to happen. Russia said repeatedly, don't do this. This is our red line. You can't do it. Ukraine's our red line. They said, and what does Kamala Harris say last year right before the invasion? The door is still open. The door is still open to Ukraine to join NATO. And Putin was like, you know what? F you. Here we go. And it's like, it just drives me crazy, man. It drives me crazy.
It is interesting because if you look at like Vietnam, that's Vietnam. Yeah, we might have been pissing off China and other countries, but Afghanistan, we were pissing people off. Syria, we were absolutely pissing people off, but we pretty much started a war with Russia. We can act like they just randomly did it, but it's like we pushed them 50 times and then they broke the door and then we're going to act stupid about it. I mean, Russia's like that was not, this is not the same as Afghanistan war. And I'm not like a weak person that's like, oh, I'm so scared or whatever, but it's like economically now China, Russia, Iran, now Saudi Arabia, we've really opened up this door. And the media always tells people, oh, the whole world agrees with us. It's just, and China actually, to their credit, sadly, they posted a funny meme, and I hate to agree with like the Chinese government because I don't like them, but they're like, here's what America means when they say rest of the world, but here's what the rest of the world really is. And they accurately pointed out all of America's allies, and on a world map, it's really not that many people, you know, because the world is huge, and they're acting like the whole world agrees with them, but really they don't. And we're starting to see that now. It's true that everyone doesn't agree with us, and it's like with the LGBT stuff. Like, if you live in America, you'd think that everywhere in the world agrees with it, and America is such a bad place that the Republicans are trying to fight. You go to Africa, they laugh about it. You go to Mexico, they laugh about it. They go to South, like, it's just like an afterthought. It's like, whatever, but like, what? That's a thing? Like, most of the world rejects it or just laughs as if, like, is that really happening? Like, there's really fights over bathrooms and sports. Like, you know, but if you live in America, you think it's everywhere. So we've kind of painted this false narrative that everything we're doing is so popular, but it's really not. I guess I want to, real quick, as the last thing, I want to hear your thoughts on the digital currency you're talking about, and also, like, what's our out? I love America. I don't want the dollar to fall. Obviously, that'll affect my life. I don't want it to, but like, what's the win? How do we win this at this point?
I mean, the Bitcoin maxis will say Bitcoin solves this. Look, I don't know, man. I don't know. I think that hard assets are going to be an important hedge in everybody's portfolio, whether it's gold or silver, or if you believe that Bitcoin is digital gold, then, you know, maybe diversify there too. But I really think it's going to come down to, you know, your own skill set and like your own capacity to create and thrive even in trying times. And, you know, I think people like you and I, because we have kind of diversified our skill set into an internet arena, like that's a good path to have, because you can move somewhere. Like, say World War III does pop off, and I'm like, yo, I'm gonna keep my show going, but I'm gonna go to, you know, I'm gonna go to Chile or something. Like, you could do that. Like, it gives you mobility. And then I think just being an entrepreneur and having and trying to like have something that's inspirational and keeps you motivated through the harsher times. I think that's what helped me over the past 3 years. So I would encourage people, if you have a passion and you're not pursuing it, please, by all means, like, we need more people in this world that are out, like, actually following their heart and their dreams and creating something beautiful. I think far too many people work for the corporate world, where you're basically, your entire, you know, individuality is just completely suppressed. And then you have all of the woke nonsense where you have to like admit your guilt for the skin color that you have. Like, forget all that. If you're working for a company like that, you got to find a way out. So I don't know. That was kind of a rant.
I think I should start chopping wood again, because I think if the banks fail, people might not care what I have to say. You know, at that point, like, when things get really desperate, you know,
learn how to be a plumber or a contractor. Like, we're going to need all that.
I have some skills, but it's basically like, you know, I'm one of those people, even during the lockdown, I tell people, don't be scared, be prepared, where, and even just having food. I mean, that's one thing. You could have canned food and stuff, but really, sure, to me, I think like the system failure is going to be not so linear, in the sense of like figuring out where you want to be. You know, it like when the lockdown happened, I knew I didn't want to be in Los Angeles, because it was like Night of the Living Dead. It's like, if you're going to be locked down in a normal neighborhood with not psychopaths, it's not going to be that crazy. Like, even if everything failed, who are your neighbors, right? Who's around you? Like, are people going to act weird? If you live in the middle of a city, like, it was literally like a freaking horror movie, because everybody good was gone and only like the street demons were out on the street. And it was like, I got out of there before the lockdown even happened, because of my news analysis. I told people, buy food. They're going to lock the country down in a couple of weeks. And a lot of people say, thank you, Anomaly. You know, I got a bunch of groceries and I didn't have to wait in line or wear a mask.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
And because I saw it coming, I'm like, let me get out of here. So I think that's stuff like that's important too. Community, and like, I think these cities are very unreliable. Like, these high crime, like dirty cities. If it's dirty now, what happens if people got to hunker down for a month? It's going to get weird.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I actually started my show 1 month after lockdown, so I didn't get to give people advance notice like you did. But I had been warning people about the fact that the Fed would likely have to hike interest rates, and that would create real pressures in a lot of industries and a lot of markets. And I've been advising, you know, most of the people in my audience, if your house has doubled in value and the interest rates for 30-year mortgages have now gone from 3.5% to 7%, but your exit price is still at double your entry price, you might want to get out of that bad boy and figure something else out. So I love being in a position where I could try and, use some of my financial expertise to like inform my audience. None of this is financial advice, by the way, just legally speaking.
Right.
But I just think that community's been great, man. Having people that actually see the world similarly to how we do, and making yourself not feel crazy because you're watching CNN or Fox News all day. Like it's just good to know that there's other like-minded people out there.
Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for being here. This might not be the most popular stream, but I think it is really interesting. And I will keep covering it no matter how popular it is, because the financial stuff, this bank collapsing, and if it's a domino effect or not, is going to, I think, affect us a lot. So, this
may not be the most popular stream, but it might be the most important stream that they've heard in a while. So I hope people take it seriously.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good weekend, and I'll cover it on Monday. This is Clint from Liberty Lockdown. You can find his stuff if you search that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter. Thank you so much, Anomaly. It was great.
Yep, and all my links are at dreamrarelinks.com. That's not financial advice, but it is real. Thanks for being here. All right, see you guys.